150 years ago, the city of Durham, North Carolina, was established in April of 1869 on the traditional homelands of the Native, Eno, and Occaneechi tribes. Durham's rich history and vibrant culture are inextricably tied to its socio-political landscape today. In the 1800s, a number of plantations could be found in the city, but following the Civil War, African Americans found Durham to be a place where they could prosper. They formed the Hayti community, which grew into a thriving business center. Home to the largest and oldest African American-owned life insurance company, the area near Paris Street became known as the Black Wall Street of Durham and received national recognition for empowering Black people. Durham was also once home to the largest tobacco company in the world, the first public African-American liberal arts institution, and one of the first sit-ins, which would lead to anti-segregation protests for years to come. Unfortunately, success did not come without strife. In 1958, Urban Renewal would build a freeway through the Hayti district and dismantle the neighborhood. Prominent queer, civil, and human rights activist Pauli Murray also calls Durham home. Community leaders like Murray took action against injustices such as the Hayti demolition. Durham continues to be recognized as a hub for innovation and creativity, but also as a progressive beacon in the South, largely influenced by its long legacy of challenging the status quo and fighting for justice. And what is a community organizer?
That's a good question. What is a community organizer? I guess the most basic definition is somebody who brings people together based on shared values and shared purpose and shared interests to reach a collective goal.
A community organizer is a person who works with other people to achieve their shared vision of a better community for everyone. There are people who are organizers, a lot of people who are organizers who don't even know that they're organizers, people who live in public housing communities and get all the residents to come together to demand the public housing authority do something different. There are people who just, are the person on their block where everyone comes to talk to about problems, and they're the person who organizes the street cleanup day, or comes down to City Hall to ask for a speed bump or a street light. I think organizers are lots of different things. But I think the most important thing to me about organizing is building shared leadership, building the leadership of the people in those communities to advocate for themselves and to build together to make change.
A person who can put those individuals together. From what I said about community, holistically, consistently building with one another in a way that uplifts one another. A person who's able to network and promote and push and pull at those individuals and things that are needed to make a community a community. Yeah.
Anyone who's willing to stand the fuck up, right? Because that's what you see over and over again. It's that one loudmouth, that one black girl that doesn't shut up. She becomes a pole of power, and that starts to reorganize. And maybe that's what we need to start calling as reorganizers. Because there's shit definitely organized out there, right? The police forces are organized. White supremacist forces, they're definitely well-funded and well-organized. So what we're attempting is to reorganize society and build off of other structures, often subterranean or invisible to so many people. And so I think a community organizer, is maybe someone who reorganizes and reorients people's energy and shows them what's possible. I feel like that's the biggest thing. It's fine to have a theoretical analysis, and that may guide your interior space, but you gotta be about it, not talk about it.
parents are Nigerian, born and raised in Nigeria. Me and my brother were born here in the US, outside of Atlanta. Durham, didn't know anything about this place before I came to Duke, didn't know anything about Durham. On election day, I was at Skewers at that party that we had organized. It was like a great atmosphere, like people felt very like, wow, we really like had done the work. It felt really good, and then, you know, the results start coming in. We're all watching the news and we're seeing like one state go red and the next state go red and the next state go red. And it's like, oh shit. I actually did a Duke Engage in New York after my freshman year, and it was all about like intersectional feminist activism and organizing, and it was the first time I was introduced to anything like in a real way. I really wanted to like continue like exploring that, and that was when the uprisings happened in Ferguson and people were just like kind of politicizing like really quickly. Mind you, I had never really been in Durham before at this point. There was this action that happened in December of 2014 that was in solidarity. It was after the non-indictment of the officer that killed Eric Garner. It was like nuts. Like the police came out in like full riot gear and people were getting tear gas and hit with rubber bullets. People got arrested. Like it was like one of the craziest actions I've ever been to. Even now, I'm like, that was wild. But that night, I had met all these activists from Durham. They were like, yeah, who are you? Like, what's, you know, this is what's going on. These are the things that we're about. And it was just really interesting because they were just so friendly. You forget that people can be like nice in a way that's genuine without an expectation that you are something or someone. I did an internship actually with these two artists, academic, multimedia, Black queer women in Durham, Julia and Alexis. I was helping them with their project called The Eternal Summer of the Black Feminist Mind. Through that experience, met so many people who were just so cool and so nice, and they were just so like warm, realizing like, wow, there's people who do this work and they love it and they're passionate and they're speaking like truth to power, and they're very genuine in their commitment to what they're doing, and they're very genuine in their commitment to community as well. And so when I graduated, I knew I wanted to stay. I knew I wanted to continue growing in the community that I was starting to form. But that was a really transformative experience working that election, because my whole job was to talk to young Black people, young Black people between the ages of 18 and 35 in Durham. And I had been doing like all this organizing work and had been like really, this was like after we'd done the Allen Building takeover and like all these things, we'd done this huge action outside the police headquarters. So I'd like had done all this work. I felt like I was really like, whoa, I had done all this stuff. Mm-hmm. It was the first time that I actually went out and talked to people about what they thought. And just on a very basic level, like, what are the issues that you care about? How does this affect you? What would you like to see in the community? I remember talking to so many folks, like young Black people, like early 20s, and I would be like trying to register them to vote and, trying to get pledge cards from them. And I would be like, okay, what's your address? And so many of them like didn't have addresses. They were like, well, I'm sleeping on my sister's couch now, and I don't know if I'm going to be in Durham in the next couple of months. And so many of them were like, I don't have a cell phone number. The cell phone I have now, it's cut off right now. I don't know if I'm getting another cell phone. And talking to people like, what are the issues that matter to you? And people being like, transportation, they've changed the bus lines multiple times, and I can't get from one side of town to the other side of town, and that's like really like difficult for me. And just never thinking about like the precarity that so many of our people live within. And when we're trying to do this political work and we're trying to organize people and fire them up and like build like consciousness, like people are just trying to take the bus home, like people are just trying to figure out where they're going to be living. I think that if you walk around Durham again and you talk to working class Black and brown folks, you talk to young folks, like it's the same issues that they had before, right? Like public transportation, childcare, my job doesn't pay me enough, I don't know where I'm gonna live, can't afford to live in this city. Even when you're doing all this community work and you're so fired up about this stuff, like I still have to get a job, I still have to work, I still have to pay bills, I still have to live under these really precarious, shaky times. I needed more solid community. And my work has shifted dramatically into really building those spaces and facilitating those spaces and wanting to be more in spaces with people, whether they have the right politics or not, but are people who are committed, I think, to a shared vision of how can we do this thing called life like a little differently and do it together. And through our intention of doing life differently together, like we are building this better world.
At this very challenging moment in our history, let us remind ourselves that we, the hundreds of thousands, the millions of women, trans people, men and youth who are here at the Women's March, we represent the powerful forces of change that are determined to prevent the dying cultures of racism,
bomb the shit out of
heteropatriarchy
them.
from rising again.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. At least one person is dead and several are injured tonight after protests and counter-protests
the right was shut down by police at a nearby park.
I'm here today to announce that the program known as DACA
White House
is being
outside
rescinded.
Trump Tower in New York. High school
Hurricane Maria
students
just came ashore in Puerto Rico. The storm weakened slightly overnight to a strong Category 4, but officials there predict entire towns will have to be rebuilt. Maria's top winds.
He will recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital, an unprecedented move breaking with U.S. policy since Israel was created, despite warnings today from Turkey's President Erdogan.
Home for me is Durham. I'm a Durham native. My father, however, he's from Nigeria. I grew up in Daymar Court projects here in Durham. It's right off of Maureen Road. Growing up, I had three older brothers. Single parent household. My mother took care of all of us. 2014, I was incarcerated again for a crime that I didn't commit. I sat in the county jail for 14 months away from my family. I got out. I applied to close to 100 jobs, I'd say, and no one would hire me. Even though that charge was dismissed, it still shows up on your record. I can remember that depression kind of starting to set back in. I was thinking around what would I do when I got home. That's why I took that culinary class. I was able to start a business with $145 in a borrowed grill. From those community events, I started kind of ministering, because a lot of the guys that will come get plates, they'll be like, yeah, cool, whatever, yeah, with that packet, I need some work. And I'll be like, nah, I don't do that anymore. You know what I mean? This is it. I'm selling these plates. You know what I mean? I can get you two of these for 15, but that's about it. That's where it started. And then a lot of those guys, they were actually able to see a standing model of change. Growing up in Durham back then, it was a bit challenging. No one to really encourage me. And at the same time, no role model to really show me the right thing. So I kind of looked towards those older individuals from my neighborhood for guidance, and a lot of them just weren't on the right path. A lot of them hustled. When I went back to school when I was 21, my son had just been born. I was just trying to do the right things for the right reasons. I got a lot of training as a healthcare technician. Things were going well, but the entire time I was still on probation and paying restitution for the charge that I got when I was 17. Little Chuck was born, kind of fell behind on the restitution. I was sent to prison. I completed some college courses while I was at Eastern. I took a culinary course once I was in there as well. I just felt like I needed more. When I got home, upon release, there still weren't many opportunities for me. And I found myself falling into an even deeper hole. I started supporting the gang and also hustling, and I was very good at it. I was able to support not just my family, but families. Like, I can remember paying plenty of people's rent Like I said, there was an attempted murder charge. I would read Bible verses and I would look for verses for encouragement because I needed encouragement constantly every day. It says Job 5:8. I would take a piece of paper and I would tear it off each one. So each individual little piece of paper had Job 5:8 on it. I would do my laps and I would look into God's eyes, and if I saw that same pain that I saw when I was looking in that little aluminum mirror at myself, I would give him one. But when I came home, I really made a promise to my higher power and to my family that I wasn't going back to that life, to that hustling. The city of Durham and Bill Bell came together and they wrote out a grant to Bloomberg Philanthropies because they had heard about the innovation team. What the grant applied for was to create upward mobility and equal opportunity for justice-involved residents. But they had no way to connect to the community. They needed to connect with somebody who's already doing community work, who is knowledgeable around these issues, and who can connect you with individuals that were directly affected. And having me ask the questions and having me recruit individuals who I know, I was able to recruit close to 100 justice-involved residents here in Durham. Bull City United is a group of justice-involved residents, people who've been locked up before, who are also ex-gang members and who are a standing model of change. A violence interrupter, what I do is basically I'm an individual who can mediate a conflict between rival gangs, can get things accomplished, but while doing that can also teach conflict resolution skills. I'm asking someone to put their gun down, what am I going to offer them? So that's where the outreach comes in. That's where I'm plugging them into those resources that they're going to need in order to change their life, like I had. I was facing 318 months. That's 26 and a half years at the age of 34. I'm not even supposed to be out here. I would do this for free if I didn't have kids to take care of. That's how passionate I am about doing stuff for the community and seeing change. And what keeps me doing it now is seeing individuals change.
Good day, everyone. I'm Kristen Dahlgren in New York, and we are coming on the air at this hour with news of a school shooting in South Florida. This took place in Parkland, Florida, at Douglas High School.
17 people. Death of Stephon Clark. He was shot dead in his grandmother's backyard. Police say they thought he had a gun, but it turned out to be a cell phone.
For justice the outrage after a jury reached their decision in shooting of Antoine Rose, a 17-year-old who was black and unarmed.
Outrage. President Trump today staunchly defended his administration's policy of separating migrant children from their parents.
We will build a great wall along the southern border.
She is reportedly one of more than 2,300 children now separated from their parents.
The nomination of Brett M. Kavanaugh of Maryland to be an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States is confirmed.
Scores arrested
According
after
to a recent
charging the
report,
Capitol
hate crimes are up in most
11
major
people are
cities,
dead
with
and
Jews
6 more wounded
suffering
after
the
a
highest
man walked
percentage of
into a
any
synagogue near
group.
downtown Pittsburgh with an assault rifle and 3 handguns.
Smashing number of women ran for office this year, resulting in historic wins for women in a year that galvanized
to every
them.
single grassroots organizer, every working parent, every mom, every member of the LGBTQ community. Every single person is responsible for this. Class Americans want a clear champion, and there is nothing radical about moral clarity in 2018.
I was born in Charlottesville, Virginia, and I lived all over Virginia, Charlottesville, Northern Virginia, and Richmond. And then just before coming to Durham, I spent a year in Chicago, which was an exciting experience. And then I came here, so I've been in Durham now for 20 years. In 2015, was asked to think about running for city council. And at first was like, y'all are crazy, and why would I ever do that? That sounds terrible. Being a place where it's much harder to actually build the sort of world that I want to build. I just had a lot of apprehension about entering into a space where I would have to hold all of those contradictions and try to make change from within a system that I found really problematic. On the other hand, there are lots of opportunities that you get access to in order to make change from within that system that you do not have from outside of it. I ultimately was convinced that it was a good opportunity, that I could do a good job, that I could win, and that it would be a way to continue to make a difference in the way that I wanted to, with more access to some of the levers of power that I wanted to be able to pull. There's a funny story that I tell people about how I got my start, early start, which was when I was 6. I led my little brother out on a strike against chores, and we made picket signs that said "Kids on Strike," because I didn't know that strike ended with an E, and we marched in the living room. We marched around the couch and chanted "Kids on Strike, Kids on Strike." And I asked my mom, like, years later, where did I get this idea? And she had no idea. A few years later, when I was 9, I ran a campaign against people killing the gypsy moth caterpillars in our neighborhood, which I now understand, like, gypsy moth caterpillars are actually kind of an invasive pest that eat all of your trees. But at the time I really liked them because they were like soft and fuzzy, and I used to like to pet them. When I found out my neighbors were all trying to kill them with these nets on the trees, I got really upset, and I like went and took the nets down wherever I saw them. I think I was just always interested in impacting the world in some way, and my worldview was really built around like wanting to make change and being excited about making change. Both of my parents had jobs where they were very like socially and community engaged in the community. My mom was a social worker and my dad did community development lending. So I had from an early age a sense of like the world being a bigger place than just my family, and a sense of political engagement. They took me and my brother to Doug Wilder's inauguration, who was the first Black governor of Virginia. So I remember, I remember watching the Million Man March together and having this really nuanced conversation about Louis Farrakhan and anti-Semitism and the Nation of Islam and Black Americans, and just, at like 14. So all of these early experiences in like politics and being involved in the community that were just part of my family, my upbringing. After I moved to Chicago, I was able to get more involved in activism just because there was a lot more going on. So I did strike support for nurses' strike. This was the first time that I really jumped into the labor movement, and that has become a real focus in my activism, thinking broadly about the role of people as workers and the kind of unity that framework can inspire and create. Learning all these things about the labor movement, I think, really helped me build an understanding of the kind of activism that I want to do. I came to undergrad already thinking of myself as an activist. I remember my freshman year at Duke, I had a friend who had a car, which was really unusual. We had this sense of how insular campus was and wanting to get out more, and so I would go on like little Durham adventures with a friend of mine and some of our other friends. We would get in our car and just drive around Durham and check things out. I worked for Hip Hop Against Racist War, SEIU, the labor union, Southern Coalition for Social Justice. I did some work with Moral Monday, was one of the Moral Monday arrestees in 2013. Worked for some other nonprofits and had a couple kids mixed in there. Yeah, it was a big transition. This is the nicest office I've ever had. I went from working in a basement with no windows with like 3 other people at a desk that probably came from a yard sale. Being in a position of authority was very, very different. Having people refer to me as Miss Johnson or Councilwoman Johnson, or my favorite, the Honorable Jillian Johnson. Like, how do you know if I'm honorable? Anyway. People caring about what I thought and said. And like, I've always had ideas, but like now people want to know what they are. It's a whole new world. Getting in the paper for what I thought was like no reason. Like in 10 years as an activist, it's like a constant struggle to get news coverage of what you're doing. Like, doing like media stunts for publicity to like get the news to pay attention. And all of a sudden I would just get quoted randomly in the newspaper, just like totally, whole new world.
solemnly swear.
Where the 116th Congress sworn in today is the most diverse in history. It includes the first two Native American women to serve. And the first Somali American Congresswoman Ilhan Rashida Tlaib of Michigan is the first Palestinian American woman member of the House.
People are striving for a middle class where a salary truly equals economic security. Far too many hard-working Americans are falling behind,
with a list of
living
demands.
paycheck to paycheck, most without labor unions to protect them.
Across the city, there were
tax
other
bill
smaller
rigged the system against working people. Rather than bringing back jobs, plants are closing. Layoffs.
That we truly embark on a comprehensive agenda of economic, social, and racial justice in the United States of America.
The Green New Deal itself is a resolution to be more expansive. Affordable apartment isn't a dream, but a norm, and that healthcare is a right.
Our environmental challenges are one of the biggest existential threats to our way of life.
I grew up on Army bases, so I don't have a real specific home place other than military architecture. I live in Durham, and I've lived here since the late 90s. August 11th and 12th were some of the most profound and intense days of my life. We heard about this Unite the Right. It was just clearly really dangerous. And so, our organizing really was directed towards that. Redneck Revolt more broadly, which is a national network. Chapters showed up from across the East Coast at the request of Anarchist People of Color, which is an organization based in Charlottesville, to defend Justice Park. We frequently hear from white liberals, "You're ruining our optics." Like, this isn't a media spectacle. Like, there are real lives that are endangered. And the murder of Heather Heyer that day, we're not here for you, white people. Like, we were asked to be here by people of color. So we're going to do something with, mostly in the case of Charlottesville, our white bodies and these firearms, these specific tools that are in accordance with the requests of people who live here. Because it's not just about surviving in fear, but winning to live in freedom. So my parents were a military family and Baptist, so doubly conservative, you might say. So it wasn't like I was raised progressive by any means. I just didn't like injustice. As a kid, like, a little skate punk, like listening to NPR. I was listening to NPR and they were narrating the riots that were being undertaken by school kids in Soweto in South Africa. And they were describing the ages of like 13, 14, 15-year-olds. I mean, that's how old I was. And I was like, damn, those kids are getting it. They're doing it, standing up for what's right. Like, I want to be like that. Like, as clumsy as my efforts were, like, I would go to the Post Library and look up in the card catalog, like Black Panthers, like communism. Like, I went to school at Trenton State, and then being on campus, there were a lot of people showing up in that educational space that didn't have my specific background. I mean, it was a profound time. Like, the Rodney King event happened, the beating happened, and the verdict happened. Yeah, and then the just outpouring of rage. The skinhead movement was really intense in parts of eastern Pennsylvania and New Jersey and New York. Like, a lot of my beliefs are forged in actual conflict with white supremacists. At 15, I was arrested. I was in the back of a squad car. It was like me and my friend, who was also white, and the cop looked up in the rearview mirror, and we were stopped at a stoplight, and he said, "You boys ever been in juvie before?" And I was like, "No." And he said, "Those black boys are gonna have fun with your white asses tonight." Understanding now the ways in which homophobia, the weaponization of black masculinity to discipline unruly white masculinity, all the threats that were implicit in the way the state was going to unleash a certain kind of carceral violence, first on those black kids, and then use them on me, right? That cultivation of a sympathetic historical understanding, like that little taste that I had, that's somebody's everyday existence, and they may have seen those cop eyes countless times, and if they haven't seen them in real life or only occasionally, they see them in their future projection, right, of how they have to pass through the world. That was the moment. Like, I can still see those cops' eyes in that rearview mirror. It's a whole new world, and it's violent and it's ugly, and like I'm in it now. So like, what are we gonna do about it? Durham was a fraught place back in the late 90s and early 2000s. I was working in public schools, so I also had really intimate and constant contact with the community. It was also a moment of transition because the city and county school systems had recently merged. It was a really instructive moment of coming into knowledge about race and how race is constructed and dealt with by government institutions, by teachers in their classrooms as they attempted to grapple with these newly diversified classrooms. Putting the historical frame around what I actually lived through and then having a narrative, a new narrative, a critical narrative that I could assign to it, radically reshaped how I understood my childhood. I was like super oppositional and vocal, particularly with my dad. People cling to things and you gotta meet them where they are too. That's something that I really carry with me is like if we're gonna all get free, like we gotta do that shit together. So when the election happened and Trump was elected, I was like, yeah, shit's gonna get real. So I started looking for organizations that were more proactive in articulating a community defense mission. And Redneck Revolt, which is a multiracial, working class oriented community defense organization, was really compelling to me. I was under weapons charges put on me by the Durham County Sheriff for having a rifle to keep the Klan out of Durham just days after Charlottesville. Yeah, Charlottesville and the things that happened subsequently, the death threats that I and my family have encountered, that shit's real, but I feel like that's just like the expansion of something that's in this country that's poisonous and violent and is a permanent piece of the architecture that some people have to walk under and live under the shadow of that every damn fucking day. Like, I may be under a corner of it right now, but I can step out into that sunlight once in a while. And some people don't have that luxury.
What is your vision for the future of like your organizing work? I think a lot of the work to build for North Carolina's future so that we can get away from this radical right-wing takeover of our legislature and all of our so many of our state institutions is by working in counties where that's not the case. Really like add some, just add energy and add to their work to try to make sure that those areas.
My vision for the future is to have a large group of individuals like myself who have been justice involved, who are a standard model of change, to work in these communities that are less fortunate and that are targeted by the police and changing lives and really having this.
Someone the other day asked me what, based on my ethics and my politics, what would the world look like? And I just wrote a very utopic sketch of what the world would look like. They said, well, what are the practical ways you would get there? And I was like, wait, what you asked me to do was like dream. Didn't know that I had to like manifest it. I think the future, and really I'm talking in kind of immediate, almost present tense terms, is that new social relationships start to emerge that are powerful, that people begin to develop new capacities to tell practical truths, figuring out ways to just disrupt federal operations, like to start monkey wrenching in like really direct ways that start to take over space and return power to local communities and to people. And people start.
What is my work in 2019? I think it's a lot of the work I started in 2018, like I said, of, you know, what are the life-giving practices that we need to reclaim and be grounded in and move through. I would say 2018 is about depth and dimension, so giving weight and real body to those things So going deeper into the practices, going deeper into the knowledge, going deeper in community. So going deeper into how can we do this thing called life differently. I want to sustain life and bring and breathe life into humanity. Like, you have to be in this work one way or the other. It doesn't necessarily look like going and protesting. It doesn't necessarily look like doing a direct action. It doesn't necessarily look like, you know, the most radical whatever. It doesn't have to look like that, but, you know, once you kind of wake up to what's really going on, to stay alive and to stay sane in all of this madness, it's like what you have to do, I think.